Welcome back to Talk the Walk. With me now is David Firestein, President and CEO of George H.W. Bush Foundation for U.S.-China Relations. Thanks again for your time, Mr. Firestein.
Thank you.
All right, let's bring the focus back to Hong Kong here. Because as you may know, Hong Kong has endured months of anti-government protest since last year, and many anti-government protesters and the opposition favored Trump over Biden because of his administration's seemingly hawkish policy on China. But some policymakers and analysts suggest that his interest in Hong Kong is only boosted by his re-election bid. Do you see Hong Kong as merely a pawn in the Trump administration's re-election campaign? And if Joe Biden wins, will he stand with Hong Kong against Beijing?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, I don't think Hong Kong is particularly important to Donald Trump just generally. It is one issue among many others in the U.S.-China relationship. And I don't think that from anything that I've seen, that President Trump, attaches particular importance to the issue. Yes, he commented on it in the summer when the national security law was adopted. Yes, there's legislation around that and sanctions against officials who were deemed to be involved in the development of the law, et cetera. But I don't think that the Hong Kong issue per se is one of the big things that President Trump spends a lot of time thinking about. And at a broader level, I would say that one of the things that I think has been remarkable about the Trump administration is that relative to all previous U.S. administrations in the modern era, the Trump administration has been far weaker on matters of human rights in China than any other U.S. administration by a large margin. President Trump, as president, has said virtually nothing publicly about the issue of human rights in China, about the issue of human rights, if you will, in Hong Kong, about the national security law.
Right.
He made brief comments, but it's just not something that has been on his radar. And the point that I want to make is this. For those in Hong Kong that somehow think that President Trump has been, quote, tough on China on issues relating to Hong Kong or human rights or other issues generally, honestly, I think if you look at the factual record and the impact of Trump administration policies, that's a gross misreading and mischaracterization of the reality. The fact is, this president, I think, has been remarkably soft on China in a variety of ways, and he's been tough on the American worker. He's been very tough on American workers through tariffs, but he hasn't been very tough on China.
All right, interesting. Well, let's take a look at Indo-Pacific because that's one of the geopolitical hotspots in our time. As we know, in 2012, the Obama administrations rolled out their pivot to China policy with a focus on Southeast Asia and Western Pacific. But under the Trump administration, we can see clearly the focus has been shifted, still in Asia, still in Indo-Pacific, but shifted to more Indian Ocean, which could be demonstrated by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's recent trip to India, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, and Vietnam. If Joe Biden wins, do you see he follows in his former boss's footsteps in Indo-Pacific policy?
Well, first of all, I think that when any administration comes in, that administration is always looking for an opportunity to make a mark for itself and to distinguish itself from previous administrations. And so when the Trump administration came in, they had kind of inherited the so-called pivot to Asia or rebalancing to Asia, as it was later called. And so the administration wanted to put its mark on policy toward Asia and to create a different framework. And so they rolled out the idea of a kind of Indo-Pacific construct ranging from basically the eastern coast of India through the Western Pacific and over to our allies in South Korea, Japan, and so on. I don't know that there is a huge difference substantively, in my judgment, between the old pivot to Asia or rebalancing to Asia under the Obama administration and the Indo-Pacific construct of the Trump administration. except that the role of India is somewhat more pronounced. India is not an ally of the United States, but it is an important partner. And certainly in the context of the Quad of the
Right.
United States, Japan, Australia, and India, it's important. But I don't see a huge substantive difference there. So to your question, I think that it's certainly possible. Well, I think it's certain that a President Biden will view the Asia Pacific region very similarly to how the Obama Biden administration framed the region when Biden was vice president. And so I think we'll see continuity. But the point that I would make is that I don't think there has been a major departure under the Trump administration from Obama era policy toward Asia.
What about Taiwan?
Well, here again, it's a good question. With respect to Taiwan, there has been some change, I would say, largely at the symbolic level. For one thing, in 2017, the Taiwan Travel Act was codified into law, signed by this president, and it has enhanced, largely at a symbolic level, the kind of physical engagement between officials from the United States and senior representatives of Taiwan. And we've seen that play out, and high-level visits occur on the part of the United States to Taiwan, including in recent weeks and months. We've also seen U.S. arms sales to Taiwan continue,
Right.
and probably at a level that, if you add it all up, is certainly a robust level of arms sales, but not necessarily all that out of sync with the level of arms sales in the Obama administration, where you had very large packages as well. So although I think mainland Chinese observers sometimes comment and observe that they feel that there has been a fairly dramatic change in the U.S. approach to Taiwan, I don't really see it the same way. I think the United States is still operating under the one China policy that has been the longtime policy of the United States. But at the margins, there is a little bit of symbolism that is accentuating a sense of the closeness of ties between the United States and Taiwan. I suspect that will largely continue, but I don't. But again, I think that looking back at U.S. policy toward Taiwan, I see mostly continuity and some, just at the margins, some level of symbolic change. But the fundamental policy has stayed the same under President Trump as it was under all previous predecessors since 1979.
Okay, let's take a look at Russia. U.S.-Russia relations nearly hit rock bottom under Trump's administration's unpredictable watch. Now, there's a South China Morning Post article on October 25th. It says Beijing has cautiously welcomed Vladimir Putin's, the Russian president's, suggestion that a military cooperation, a military alliance between Russia and China is certainly imaginable. Will a Biden or the Trump administration accelerate the Russian-China alliance? And is that a nightmare for Washington, for whoever sits in the White House?
Well, a few things. One, I personally, having worked in China and in Russia, and knowing both countries, knowing both languages, I don't worry a lot myself as an American who is interested in foreign policy about any notion of a China-Russia alliance for a number of different reasons. One, philosophically and doctrinally, China doesn't do alliances, full stop. It doesn't have allies, with arguably the exception of North Korea, which would probably not meet the U.S. definition of a military alliance, but it's a kind of gray area. But that's the only country that even comes close to being a, quote, ally of China. China seeks out a position of non-alignment. That's one of its core principles, and independence. And the notion that China would form an alliance with anyone is very problematic. It contravenes Chinese doctrine, and I just don't think that's going to happen. Also, frankly, there's a lot of historic bad blood between China and Russia. And I think there's a lot of rivalry, if you will, beneath the surface in that relationship that would represent a kind of glass ceiling for where a China-Russia relationship could go. Just if you look at the trade numbers between China and Russia, they're a small fraction of the trade numbers between China and the United States, for example. So it's not a very robust relationship. It's a little warmer today than it was some years ago. and a little bit more trade today than there was some years ago. But I don't think that a China-Russia alliance is a nightmare to anyone, and I don't think it's going to happen. Furthermore, I do think that the United States worries. I won't say worries, but thinks a lot about the competitive threat that China poses to the United States. I think the United States thinks a lot about things that Russia does that are deemed very problematic for the United States, such as, for example, being actively involved in the presidential campaign in the context of Facebook and advertisements and so on. But I think the concerns around both countries are somewhat different. The dynamics with both countries are different. And I think the United States doesn't worry so much about what if China and Russia come together or gang up on the United States, but rather looks at each country on its own merits and calibrates its policies based on that assessment.
All right, Mr. Firestein, great to have you on with us. Unfortunately, time's up. I'll see you right here next week on Talk the Walk. Stay with us.